A widow walks into a frontier store carrying two handmade saddles that could save her life, or condemn her to starvation. The shopkeeper sneers. The town watches. But one man sees what everyone else missed: craftsmanship born from desperation and skill no one valued. When he offers her more than money, he offers her a chance to prove she's more than the tragedy that defined her. She takes the first step toward a battle she didn't know was coming. Greed, fire, and betrayal will test whether she can defend what she's built or lose everything again. Follow this story to the end, and if it moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The wind carried dust through the half-open door of Miller's general store, stirring the smell of dried tobacco and old leather. Lian Chen stood just inside the threshold, her fingers wrapped tight around the straps of two saddles she'd carried 3 miles on foot. The weight had left marks on her shoulders, red lines she'd ignore until they faded. She needed this sale, needed it more than pride, more than the ache in her back, more than the shame burning in her chest as every eye in the store turned toward her. She was used to the stares by now. The shopkeeper, a thick-necked man named Miller with tobacco stains in his beard, glanced up from his ledger. His expression shifted from annoyance to dismissal in the span of a breath. "Widow Chen," he said flatly. Not a greeting, a label. Lian stepped forward, setting the saddles carefully on the counter. The leather gleamed even in the dim light, every stitch precise, every edge beveled smooth. She'd worked on them through the night, her hands cramping, her lamp burning low. They were the best work she'd ever done. They had to be. "I'm here to sell these," she said quietly. Her voice didn't shake. She wouldn't let it. Miller didn't touch them. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, studying her instead of the saddles. Behind him, 2 ranch hands lingered near the feed sacks, pretending not to listen. A woman in a faded blue dress stood by the bolts of fabric, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "You make these yourself?" Miller asked. "Yes." He reached out lazily, running one finger along the saddle horn, barely looking at it. "Decent enough, I suppose, for a woman's work?" The insult landed soft, almost casual. Lian said nothing. She'd learned that silence cost less than arguments. Miller straightened, scratching his jaw. "I'll give you $8 for the pair." The number hit her like a fist to the stomach. $8 wouldn't cover a week's worth of flour and salt, let alone the rent on the shack she'd been holding on to by her fingernails. She'd spent 2 months gathering scraps of leather, trading eggs and mending to get the tools she needed. These saddles were worth $40 each, maybe more, but Miller knew she was desperate. And desperation on the frontier had a price. "These are worth more than that," Lian said carefully. "The stitching alone—" "I'm not interested in stitching," Miller cut in. "I'm interested in what I can sell. And the truth is, Mrs. Chen, people around here don't buy saddles from widows. They buy them from craftsmen, men who've been doing this their whole lives." He leaned forward, his voice dropping into something that might have been mistaken for kindness if it weren't so condescending. $8 is a fair offer. You'd be smart to take it." The ranch hands exchanged glances. The woman by the fabric bolts looked away. Lian's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, wanted to demand what the saddles were worth, wanted to walk out with her head high. But she also wanted to eat, wanted to keep the roof she barely had, wanted to survive another month in a town that had decided she didn't belong. She opened her mouth to accept. "Hold on." The voice came from the back corner of the store, low and steady. Lian turned. A man stepped out from behind a row of shelves, tall and lean, wearing a duster coat streaked with trail dust. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but she could see the line of his jaw, the calm set of his mouth. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Miller's expression soured. "Nathan, didn't see you there." "Didn't figure you did." Nathan Cole crossed the store in a few long strides, stopping beside Lian. He didn't look at her. His attention was fixed on the saddles. He picked up the first one, turning it over in his hands. His fingers traced the stitching, tested the weight, examined the underside where the fleece lining met the leather. He set it down and lifted the second, repeating the process with the same careful focus. The store had gone quiet. Finally, Nathan set the saddle back on the counter and looked at Miller. "These are custom work. Hand-stitched, reinforced at the stress points, treated leather that'll last through a hard winter. You know that as well as I do. Miller shifted uncomfortably. I made her a fair offer. You made her an insult. Nathan's voice didn't rise, but the weight behind it pressed into the room like a storm front. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather wallet, counting bills onto the counter. I'll pay $80 for the pair. Leon's breath caught. Miller's face flushed red. Now wait just a... $80, Nathan repeated. He looked at Leon for the first time, his eyes pale gray and unreadable. That fair to you, ma'am? She stared at the bills on the counter. $80. Enough for food, for rent, for breathing room she hadn't had in months. Enough to mean something. Yes, she whispered. Nathan nodded once and slid the money toward her. They're mine, then. Leon's fingers trembled as she picked up the bills, folding them carefully before tucking them into the pocket of her worn coat. She didn't know what to say, didn't know if she should say anything. Gratitude felt too small, and everything else felt too large. Nathan lifted both saddles, balancing them easily over one shoulder. He tipped his hat to Miller, a gesture that somehow felt more like a challenge than courtesy, and turned toward the door. Then he paused, glancing back at Leon. You know how to maintain these? He asked. Keep the leather oiled, check the stitching after hard use? She blinked, caught off guard. Yes, I made them. Good. He shifted the saddles slightly. I've got a ranch 2 hours north of here. Could use someone who knows how to keep gear working right. You interested in finishing the job? The question hung in the air like something fragile. Leanne stared at him, her mind racing. She didn't know this man. Didn't know if the offer was genuine or if it came with strings she couldn't see. But she also knew what staying in town meant. More stares, more sneers, more days like this one, where her worth was measured in how little she'd accept. I'll come, she heard herself say. Nathan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened, just barely. Be ready at dawn. I'll have a wagon out front of the boarding house. He walked out without waiting for a response, the saddles swaying on his shoulder as the door swung shut behind him. Leanne stood frozen, the money still warm in her pocket, her heart pounding against her ribs. Around her, the store erupted into whispers. Miller slammed his ledger shut. The woman in the blue dress leaned toward one of the ranch hands, murmuring something Leanne couldn't hear. The whole town would know by sunset. But Leanne didn't care. For the first time in 2 years, she had more than survival. She had a chance. The boarding house smelled like boiled cabbage and mildew. Leanne sat on the edge of her narrow bed, the $80 spread out on the blanket in front of her like a hand of cards. She'd counted it 3 times already, but she counted it again, her fingers smoothing each bill flat. It was real. She set aside enough for the landlady, enough for supplies, and tucked the rest into the inside pocket of her coat, where it couldn't be seen. Then she packed her few belongings into a canvas sack, 2 dresses, a spare pair of stockings, the tools she'd used to make the saddles, and a small wooden box that held nothing but a faded photograph and a ring she no longer wore. When she was finished, she sat in the dark and waited for dawn. Sleep didn't come. Her mind spun with questions she couldn't answer. What kind of man paid fair price for work no one else valued? What kind of ranch needed someone like her? And what would happen when he realized she was more trouble than she was worth? But beneath the fear was something else. Something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. Hope. The wagon was waiting when she stepped outside, just as Nathan had promised. The sky was still gray with pre-dawn light, the air cold enough to sting her lungs. Nathan sat on the driver's bench, reins loose in his hands, his duster pulled tight against the chill. A black mare stood hitched to the wagon, her breath steaming in the cold. Morning, Nathan said simply. Leanne climbed into the back of the wagon, settling her bag beside a crate of tools and a sack of grain. Nathan didn't ask if she was ready. He just clicked his tongue, and the mare started forward, hooves clopping softly on the dirt road. The town slipped away behind them, swallowed by distance and dust. Leanne watched it go, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't look back. The ride north was quiet. Nathan didn't talk much, and Leanne didn't push. She kept her eyes on the landscape rolling past. Open plains dotted with scrub brush, distant mountains bruised purple against the horizon, the sky spreading wide and endless above them. It was beautiful in a way that hurt. After an hour, Nathan broke the silence. "You been working leather long?" "Since I was a girl," Leon said. "My father was a saddler. He taught me." Nathan nodded, his gaze still fixed on the road. "Good trade to know." "It was." She hesitated, then added, "Before." He didn't ask what before meant. Maybe he didn't need to. The frontier was full of befores, lives people left behind, names they didn't use anymore, grief they carried in silence. "You got family?" Nathan asked after a while. "Not anymore." He accepted that without comment, and Lan was grateful. She didn't want to explain the fever that took her husband, the town that blamed her for surviving it, the loneliness that followed her like a shadow. Another hour passed. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill. Leon's stomach tightened as the landscape began to change. Rolling hills replaced the flatland, and scattered cattle appeared in the distance, grazing near a thin creek that cut through the valley. Then she saw it. The ranch sat in a wide basin surrounded by low ridges, a sprawling collection of buildings clustered around a main house. The barn was large but weathered, its red paint peeling in strips. Fences crisscrossed the property, some intact, others sagging. Smoke rose from the chimney of the house, and a few men moved near the corral, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. Nathan guided the wagon down the slope, and the men turned to watch. Leon felt their eyes on her, sharp and assessing. She kept her chin up, her hands steady in her lap. The wagon stopped near the barn. Nathan climbed down and offered her a hand. She took it briefly, stepping onto solid ground, her legs stiff from the ride. A broad-shouldered man with a graying beard approached, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at Nathan, then at Leon, his brow furrowing. "This her?" he asked. "This is Mrs. Chen," Nathan said. "She's here to work." The man's skepticism was obvious, but he didn't argue. He nodded once, slowly. "Name's Garrett. I run the hands." "Leanne," she said quietly. Garrett studied her for a long moment, then turned back to Nathan. "You're the boss." It wasn't quite acceptance, but it wasn't refusal either. Nathan gestured toward the barn. "We'll get you settled. Then I'll show you what needs doing." Lion followed him across the yard, past the corral where horses stamped and snorted, past the bunkhouse where a few men lingered in the doorway, watching her with expressions she couldn't read. The barn was dim and cool inside, smelling of hay and horse sweat. Nathan led her to a small room at the back, barely big enough for a cot and a trunk. A single window let in a shaft of pale light. "This'll be yours," he said. "It's not much, but it's dry." Leon set her bag down on the cot. "It's enough." Nathan leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Chen. The men here aren't used to working with a woman. Some of them won't like it. But if you do the work and do it well, they'll come around. Or they won't. Either way, you'll be paid fair for what you do." "I don't need them to like me," Leon said. "I just need to work." Something shifted in Nathan's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "Good. We'll start tomorrow. Get some rest." He left her there, his footsteps fading into the noise of the ranch. Leon sat on the cot, her hands resting on her knees. Through the window, she could see the valley stretching out, vast and wild and unforgiving. She'd come here with nothing but skill and desperation. Now she had a roof, a job, and a chance to prove she was more than the widow everyone dismissed. It would have to be enough. Because the alternative, going back to that dusty store, to Miller's sneer, to the town that had already buried her in their minds, was a kind of death she refused to accept. Leon stood and began unpacking her things, her movements slow and deliberate. She hung her dresses on a nail in the wall. She set her tools on the trunk, arranging them carefully. She placed the wooden box with the photograph on the windowsill where the light could touch it. Then she walked outside to see what needed fixing. Oh, the ranch was a puzzle of broken things. Leon spent the rest of the day walking the property, her eyes cataloging every crack, every loose board, every piece of equipment left to rust in the weather. The men watched her from a distance, their conversations dying when she passed, picking up again when she moved on. She ignored them. Near the barn, she found a wagon with a shattered axle, the wood split clean through. Someone had tried to patch it with rope and wire, a makeshift fix that wouldn't last a week. Leon knelt beside it, running her fingers along the brake, measuring the damage in her mind. "That's been sitting there since spring." She looked up. One of the ranch hands stood a few feet away, a wiry man with sun-darkened skin and a crooked smile. He looked younger than the others, maybe 20, with an easy posture that suggested he didn't take much seriously. "Why hasn't anyone fixed it?" Leanne asked. The man shrugged. "Garrett says it's too far gone. Easier to build a new one than fix the old." Leanne stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Garrett's wrong." The man blinked, surprised. Then he laughed, a short bark of amusement. "You gonna tell him that?" "I'm gonna fix it," Leanne said simply. "Then he'll see." The man's grin widened. "Name's Caleb. And I gotta say, Mrs. Chen, I like your style." He tipped his hat and walked away, still smiling. Leanne turned back to the wagon, her mind already working through the steps. She'd need fresh wood, proper tools, and time. But she'd fixed worse with less. She could do this. That night, Leanne ate alone in her room. A plate of beans and cornbread Garrett had left outside her door without a word. The food was plain but filling, and she cleaned the plate down to the last crumb. Outside, she could hear the men talking and laughing in the bunkhouse, their voices muffled by distance. She didn't try to join them. She wasn't here to make friends. She lay down on the cot, pulling the thin blanket over her shoulders. The room was cold, but she'd slept in colder. The mattress was hard, but she'd slept on harder. She closed her eyes and let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might feel like to belong somewhere again. It was a dangerous thought. Hope always was. But she held on to it anyway, fragile and stubborn, as sleep finally pulled her under. The next morning, Leanne woke before dawn. She dressed quickly, pulling on her oldest dress and tying her hair back with a strip of worn ribbon. Then she gathered her tools and walked out into the cold, gray light. The ranch was quiet, most of the men still asleep. Only Nathan was awake, standing near the corral with a cup of coffee in his hands. He nodded when he saw her but didn't speak. Leanne went straight to the broken wagon. She worked through the morning, measuring and cutting, shaping a new axle from a plank of oak she found in the barn. Her hands moved with practiced precision, every stroke of the saw deliberate, every notch carved clean. The work was hard, but it was familiar, and familiar was a kind of comfort. By midday, Caleb wandered over, watching her with open curiosity. "You really think you can fix that thing?" "I know I can," Leanne said without looking up. He crouched beside her, studying the new axle. "Huh, that's some fine work." Leanne didn't answer. She didn't need his approval. But when he offered to help lift the wagon so she could fit the axle into place, she accepted. Together, they raised the frame and Leanne slid the new axle home, securing it with iron pins she'd heated and shaped herself. When it was done, she stepped back, wiping sweat from her forehead. The wagon stood solid, whole again. Caleb let out a low whistle. "I'll be damned. Garrett's going to eat his words." Leanne allowed herself a small smile. "Good, Sal." Garrett didn't eat his words, but he didn't argue when Nathan told him the wagon was fixed. He just grunted and moved on to the next task. It was enough. Over the following days, Leanne kept working. She repaired a barn door that had been jammed shut for months, its hinges rusted and bent. She patched a hole in the roof of the bunkhouse, climbing up with a bundle of shingles and a hammer, while the men watched in silence. She fixed a broken fence post, a cracked water trough, a saddle rack that had collapsed under its own weight. Slowly, the ranch began to change. And slowly, the men began to change too. They stopped falling silent when she walked past. They started nodding when they saw her, a few even offering gruff greetings. Caleb became something like a friend, bringing her coffee in the mornings and joking about Garrett's stubbornness. Even Garrett himself softened, just a little. He still didn't smile, but he stopped questioning her work. Nathan said nothing, but Leanne caught him watching her sometimes, his expression thoughtful. She didn't know what he saw when he looked at her, didn't know if it mattered. All she knew was that for the first time in 2 years, she felt useful, needed, like she might actually have a place here. Well, 3 weeks after her arrival, Leanne was working in the barn when she heard hooves outside. She looked up to see a rider approaching, a stranger on a gray stallion, his coat fine and his posture arrogant. She set down her tools and stepped outside. The man dismounted smoothly, tying his horse to the hitching post. He was older, maybe 50, with slicked back hair and cold eyes that swept over the ranch like he was pricing it. Nathan walked out of the house, his expression unreadable. Pike. The man, Pike, smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Nathan Cole, been a while. Not long enough. Pike's smile widened. Still got that rough charm, I see. He glanced around the yard, his gaze landing on Leon for a moment before moving on. I'm here on business. Heard you bought some saddles off a widow in town. Fine work, from what I'm told. Nathan's jaw tightened. They're mine. So I heard. Pike's tone was light, casual. Thing is, I had an arrangement with that widow. She was supposed to sell them to me. Leon's blood went cold. Nathan took a step forward. That's a lie. Pike shrugged. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. But I'm willing to pay good money for those saddles. More than you did, I'd wager. They're not for sale. Everything's for sale, Cole. You just haven't heard the right price yet. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Leon's hands curled into fists at her sides. Nathan's voice dropped, quiet and dangerous. Get off my property! Pike's smile finally faded. He stared at Nathan for a long moment, then tipped his hat. We'll talk again. He mounted his horse and rode away, dust rising in his wake. Leon's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know who Pike was, but she knew men like him. Men who took what they wanted and crushed anyone who stood in their way. Nathan turned to her, his expression grim. You know him? No, Leon said, but I know his kind. Nathan nodded slowly. So do I. He walked back into the house without another word, leaving Leon standing in the yard, the weight of trouble settling heavy on her shoulders. The peace she'd found here was fragile, and fragile things, on the frontier, never lasted long. Pike's shadow lingered long after his horse disappeared over the ridge. Leon stood in the yard, her arms crossed tight against her chest, watching the dust settle back onto the road. The air felt different now, charged with something she couldn't name but recognized all the same. Trouble had a smell to it, sharp and metallic, like blood on iron. Nathan emerged from the house carrying a rifle. He didn't look at her as he walked past, heading toward the barn with measured steps that spoke of practiced calm. But Leon saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw worked like he was chewing on words he wouldn't say out loud. She followed him. Inside the barn, Nathan set the rifle against the wall and began checking the locks on the tack room. His movements were methodical, deliberate, the actions of a man who'd learned to prepare for storms before the first drop of rain fell. Who is he? Leon asked. Nathan tested a padlock, then moved to the next one. Victor Pike, cattle trader out of Cheyenne, runs most of the stock sales between here and Denver. And? And he's got a reputation for getting what he wants. Nathan finally looked at her, his gray eyes flat and hard. One way or another. Leon's stomach tightened. I never made any arrangement with him. I don't even know who he is. I know that. Nathan pulled a chain through the tack room handles, securing them together. But Pike doesn't care about truth. He cares about profit. If he thinks those saddles are worth something, he'll find a way to claim them. They're yours. You paid for them. That won't matter to him. Nathan straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. Men like Pike don't see purchases. They see opportunities. And right now, you're the opportunity. The words settled over Leon like a heavy coat. She'd spent 2 years trying to disappear, trying to become small enough that the world would stop noticing her. Now a stranger wanted something she'd made, and that want was dangerous. What do we do? She asked. Nathan was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Then he looked at her again, and something in his expression softened. We do what we've been doing. You work. I run the ranch. And if Pike comes back, we deal with it. That simple? Nothing's ever simple. Nathan picked up the rifle and checked the chamber. But sometimes you don't get to choose the fight. You just get to choose whether you stand or run. Leon thought about the town she'd left behind, the boarding house that smelled like failure, Miller's sneer across a counter that might as well have been a wall. She thought about the $80 that had given her a chance to stop running. I'm not running, she said. Nathan nodded once, like he'd expected nothing less. Good. Then we'll figure it out together. He walked past her, back into the sunlight, leaving Leon alone with the smell of hay and leather and the weight of a decision that felt heavier than any saddle she'd ever carried. That night, Leanne lay awake on her cot, listening to the wind press against the barn walls. She could hear the horses shifting in their stalls, the creak of wood settling, the distant call of a coyote somewhere in the hills. Normal sounds, safe sounds. But beneath them she heard something else. The echo of Pike's voice, smooth and certain, promising trouble that hadn't arrived yet but would. She'd learned to trust those echoes. They were warnings written in a language the frontier taught everyone who survived it. Sleep came late and left early. The next morning, Leanne was working on a broken harness when Garrett appeared in the barn doorway, his expression grim. "Boss wants to see you," he said. Leanne set down her tools and followed him across the yard to the house. It was the first time she'd been inside since arriving. The main room was spare but well kept, with a stone fireplace, a heavy wooden table, and shelves lined with books that looked actually read. Nathan stood by the window, his back to the door, staring out at the valley. "Close the door," he said without turning. Garrett did, then took up a position against the wall, arms crossed. Leanne stood in the center of the room, waiting. Nathan turned to face her. "Pike sent a man this morning, showed up at dawn with a written offer." "For the saddles?" "For you." The words hit Leanne like a slap. "What?" Nathan walked to the table and picked up a piece of paper, holding it out to her. She took it, her hand suddenly unsteady. The letter was written in careful script, businesslike and cold. Pike was offering to hire her as his personal leather worker, with payment 3 times what she'd make on a ranch. The terms were generous. The tone was final. "He thinks I'll just go," Leanne said slowly. "He thinks you don't have a choice." Nathan took the letter back. "He knows you're a widow with no family, no property, no standing. He figures enough money will make you forget where you are." Leanne's throat tightened. "And if I refuse?" Garrett shifted against the wall. "Then he'll find another way." Nathan shot him a look but didn't argue. Instead, he turned back to Leanne. "I need to know what you want to do. This is your fight as much as mine. Maybe more." Leanne looked down at her hands. They were rough from work, scarred from tools and leather, and years of holding on to things that tried to slip away. She thought about the offer, about the money that could buy her real safety instead of this fragile borrowed peace. She thought about leaving before things got worse. Then she thought about the wagon she'd fixed, the barn door that opened smooth now, the way Caleb had started bringing her coffee without asking, the small things that added up to something larger than survival. "I want to stay," she said. Nathan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes warmed. "Then you'll stay, and we'll handle Pike." "How?" "Same way we handle everything else on this ranch. One day at a time, with our eyes open." He folded the letter and tossed it into the fireplace, where it caught flame and curled into ash. "Garrett, I want men on watch rotation starting tonight. 2-hour shifts, eyes on the road, and the valley approaches." Garrett nodded. "You expecting him to try something?" "I'm expecting him to do exactly what he always does, push until something breaks." Nathan looked at Leanne again. "And we're not breaking." The meeting ended with a gravity that pressed into Leanne's chest. She walked back to the barn feeling like she'd just stepped into a current she couldn't see but could feel pulling at her feet. Caleb found her an hour later carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing his crooked smile. "Heard Pike's making trouble. Word travels fast. Small ranch." He handed her a cup and leaned against the workbench. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're staying." Leanne warmed her hands on the cup. "Why?" "Because you're good at this. Better than most of the men here, if I'm being honest." He grinned. "And because Garrett hates admitting he was wrong about you. Watching him choke on his pride is the best entertainment I've had in months." Despite everything, Leanne felt herself smile. That's a terrible reason. "Maybe, but it's true." Caleb's grin faded into something more serious. "You should know, though, Pike's got resources. Money, men, connections. If he wants something bad enough, he usually gets it." "Usually isn't always." "No," Caleb agreed. "But it's close enough to worry about." They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher through the barn door. Outside, the ranch moved through its rhythms, horses being fed, fences being checked, men working with the kind of focus that came from knowing every day counted. Leon had spent so long on the edges of things, watching life happen to other people. Now she was in the middle of it, and the weight of that position settled on her shoulders like armor she wasn't sure she knew how to wear. "Caleb," she said quietly, "if it comes to a fight, will the men stand?" He looked at her for a long moment. "For Nathan, absolutely. He's a good boss, fair pay, decent treatment, doesn't ask more than he gives. And for me," Caleb's expression softened. "You've been here 3 weeks, Mrs. Chen. You fixed a wagon Garrett said was dead, patched a roof no one else wanted to climb, and didn't complain once. That counts for something." He paused. "But I won't lie to you. Some of the men still see you as the widow Nathan brought in out of charity. If Pike comes, they'll protect the ranch. Whether they're protecting you specifically, that's still being decided." It was an honest answer. Leanne appreciated that more than empty reassurance. "Then I'll just have to keep proving myself," she said. "That's the spirit." Caleb raised his cup in a mock toast. "To stubborn widows and the trouble they bring." Leanne clinked her cup against his. "To trouble." The days that followed were tense with waiting. Nathan kept the watch rotation tight, and the men moved through their work with weapons closer to hand than usual. Leanne kept working too, throwing herself into repairs and maintenance, with a focus that burned through her anxiety like fire through kindling. She rebuilt a storage shed that had been leaning for years, replacing rotten boards and reinforcing the frame until it stood square and solid. She repaired bridles and reins, her fingers moving through familiar patterns, while her mind stayed alert for sounds that didn't belong. Nothing happened. Pike didn't come back. No riders appeared on the ridge. The ranch stayed quiet, and the quiet was worse than any confrontation because it felt like a held breath. On the 5th day, Nathan found her working on a saddle in the barn, replacing worn stirrup leathers with fresh straps she'd cut and tooled herself. "You're good at this," he said, watching her work. "I should be. I've been doing it since I was 12. Nathan pulled up an overturned bucket and sat down, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "Your father teach you?" "Yes." Leon didn't look up from the leather. "He said a good saddle was worth more than gold because gold couldn't carry you through hard country." "Smart man." "He was." Her hands stilled for a moment. "He died when I was 16. Pneumonia took him in 3 days." "I'm sorry." Leon shrugged, picking up her work again. "The frontier takes everyone eventually. You just hope you get enough time to matter first." Nathan was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "My father built this ranch, spent 20 years breaking land that didn't want to be broken, raising cattle that didn't want to be raised, worked himself into an early grave doing it. Why'd you stay?" "Because someone had to." He looked at her then, his gray eyes steady. "And because leaving felt like letting him down, like all that work would have been for nothing." Leon understood that. The weight of inheritance, the burden of honoring the dead by refusing to quit. It was a frontier logic that made no sense anywhere else, but here it was the only logic that mattered. "Pike will come back," Nathan said quietly. "I know. When he does, it won't be friendly." "I know that too." Nathan leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "I need you to understand something, Mrs. Chen. This ranch has been my life since I was old enough to hold a rope. I fought droughts, winters that killed half my herd, raiders who thought they could take what I built. I'm still here because I don't give up what's mine." He paused, his expression hardening. "You're part of this ranch now. That means you're mine to protect. Pike wants to push, he'll push against both of us. And I don't back down." The words should have felt possessive, maybe even threatening, but the way Nathan said them, calm and certain, they felt like a promise instead. "I don't need protecting," Leon said. "Everyone needs protecting sometimes." Nathan stood, his shadow falling across the workbench. "But I'm guessing you're pretty good at protecting yourself too." "I've had practice." "Good. Because when this blows up, we're going to need all the practice we can get." He walked out, leaving Leanne alone with her tools and the saddle and the growing certainty that trouble wasn't just coming anymore. It was already here, circling like wolves in the dark. That night, during the late watch, Leanne woke to voices outside the barn. She pulled on her boots and coat and stepped into the cold, where she found Nathan and Garrett standing near the corral, their voices low and urgent. "3 riders on the eastern ridge," Garrett was saying. "Just sitting there, watching?" How long? 10 minutes, maybe more. Dawson spotted them from the bunkhouse. Nathan's jaw tightened. They still there? Were when I came to get you. Leon approached quietly, and both men turned. Nathan didn't send her away. Pike's men? She asked. Probably. Nathan looked toward the ridge, though it was too dark to see anything beyond the nearest fence line. Letting us know they're watching. What do we do? Nothing. Nathan's voice was hard. They're not on our land. We can't do anything except watch back. Garrett spat into the dirt. Don't like it. Neither do I. But starting a fight on their terms is exactly what Pike wants. They stood there in the cold, 3 people staring into darkness, waiting for something to move. After a while, Garrett muttered a curse and headed back toward the bunkhouse to wake the next watch. Leon stayed. You should get some sleep, Nathan said. So should you. He smiled faintly. Fair point. They stood in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Above them, stars burned cold and distant, indifferent to the small dramas playing out below. Leanne thought about all the nights she'd spent alone, staring at those same stars, wondering if she'd ever find a place where she could stop looking over her shoulder. This ranch wasn't that place. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was closer than anything else she'd found. Why did you pay for the saddles? She asked suddenly. Nathan glanced at her, surprised. What? In the store. You could have walked away. Let Miller cheat me and gone on with your day. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a long time, his gaze turning back to the darkness. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. Because I know what it's like to be undervalued, to have people look at what you've built and see nothing worth respecting. He paused. And because those saddles were good work. Better than good. They deserved a fair price. So it was about the saddles. No. He looked at her again. It was about you. The saddles were just the proof. Something in Leanne's chest tightened. She didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to hold the weight of being seen when she'd spent so long trying to be invisible. Thank you, she said finally. Nathan nodded. Get some sleep, Mrs. Chen. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He walked back toward the house, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. Leon stayed a moment longer, looking up at the stars and trying to believe that things could work out, that trouble could be faced down, that a widow with nothing but skill and stubbornness could stand against a man like Pike and survive. It was a fragile belief, but she held on to it anyway. The next morning brought the first real test. Leon was working on the fence line near the southern pasture when she heard the sound of approaching horses. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. 4 riders came down the road at an easy pace, their horses well-groomed, their clothes too fine for ranch work. The man in front was young, maybe 30, with a sharp face and eyes that calculated everything they saw. He pulled up near where Leon stood, his smile polite and empty. Morning, ma'am? Leon set down her hammer. Can I help you? Hope so. Name's Trent. I work for Mr. Pike. He gestured to the men behind him. We're here to make a delivery. We didn't order anything. Not for the ranch. For you. Trent reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. Mr. Pike wanted you to have this. Token of goodwill. Leon didn't move. I don't want anything from Pike. Now, ma'am, that's not very neighborly. Trent's smile widened, showing teeth. Mr. Pike's just trying to help. He knows you're in a difficult position, working on a ranch that might not be stable long term. He's offering you security. A future. I have a future. Do you? Trent leaned forward in his saddle, his voice dropping into something almost sympathetic. See, the thing about ranches like this, they come and go. Bad winter, rustlers, market crash. Any one of those things could put Cole out of business. Then where would you be? That's not your concern. But it is. Trent's expression hardened. Mr. Pike doesn't like to see talent wasted, and you, Mrs. Chen, are talented. He's willing to pay you what you're worth, more than Cole ever could. I'm not for sale. Everyone's for sale. It's just a matter of price. He tossed the package at her feet. Think about it. Mr. Pike's a patient man, but patience has limits. He pulled his horse around and the 4 men rode off, kicking up dust that hung in the air long after they disappeared. Leon stared at the package lying in the dirt. Part of her wanted to leave it there, to let it rot in the sun. But another part, the part that had survived 2 years of barely scraping by, needed to know what Pike thought would buy her. She picked it up and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a bolt of fabric, deep blue silk that shimmered in the sunlight. The kind of cloth she hadn't seen since before her husband died, the kind that cost more than a month's wages. Tucked into the folds was a note written in Pike's elegant hand. For a woman of quality, consider what else quality could bring you. Leon's hands trembled as she crumpled the note. The fabric slipped through her fingers, pooling in the dirt like spilled water. She left it there and walked back to the barn. Nathan found her an hour later, working on a bridle with movements so sharp and precise they looked like violence. "Heard Pike's men came by," he said. "They did." "What did they want?" Leon drove her all through the leather, with more force than necessary. "To remind me that I'm poor and desperate and should be grateful for whatever scraps rich men throw at me." Nathan picked up the piece of blue silk she'd brought back and dropped on the workbench. "This the scraps?" "That's the bait." She looked up at him, her eyes fierce. "He thinks I'll trade my work for pretty things. Like I'm some kind of fool who doesn't know the difference between a gift and a chain." "You're not a fool." "No." Leon set down the awl, her hand steadying. "And I'm not for sale. Not to Pike, not to anyone." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up the silk and walked to the barn door where he dropped it into a water trough. The fabric darkened and sank, ruined beyond recovery. "There," he said. "Now he knows." Leon felt something loosen in her chest. "He'll be angry. Let him be angry." Nathan turned back to her, his expression hard as iron. "Pike's been pushing at this ranch for years, trying to find a weakness he can exploit. He thought you were that weakness. He was wrong." "You don't know that yet." "Yes, I do." Nathan walked closer, his voice dropping low. "Because you're still here, and every day you stay, you prove him wrong a little bit more." The words settled into Leon like seeds in good soil. She didn't know if they'd grow into anything strong enough to hold against what was coming, but she wanted to believe they could. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait. And we work. And when Pike makes his next move, we'll be ready." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. The week that followed felt like the pause before a storm. The men worked with weapons in easy reach. Nathan doubled the watch and started writing the property lines himself, checking for signs of trouble. Lion kept repairing and building, her hands busy even when her mind churned with worry. Caleb started teaching her to shoot, setting up bottles on fence posts and showing her how to hold the rifle steady, how to breathe through the kick. She wasn't good at it, not yet, but she was getting better. And better felt like progress, even if it was slow. On the 8th day, the storm finally broke. Leon was in the barn at sunset when she heard shouting from the yard. She ran outside to find the men gathered near the main gate, their faces hard with anger. Someone had cut the fence along the northern pasture. 20 head of cattle were missing. Nathan's expression was murderous. "When?" "Had to be during the day," Garrett said. "We rode that line this morning and it was intact." "Tracks?" "Yeah, 4 horses, headed northeast toward Pike's Range." Nathan turned to look at the horizon where the sun was bleeding red into the hills. "He's making it personal now." "You want us to ride after them?" one of the hands asked. "No." Nathan's voice was cold and controlled. "That's what he wants. Get us off the ranch, split us up, make us sloppy." He looked at Garrett. "Double the watch tonight. No one sleeps alone. And if anyone sees riders that don't belong, you shoot first and ask questions after." The men dispersed, their faces grim. Leon stood frozen, the reality of what was happening finally sinking in. This wasn't just pressure anymore. This was war. Nathan walked past her toward the house, and she followed. "He stole your cattle," she said. "He's testing our defenses, seeing how far he can push before we push back." "And what do we do?" Nathan stopped at the porch steps, his back to her. "We don't give him what he wants. We don't panic. We don't scatter." He turned, and his eyes were hard. "And we sure as hell don't give him you." "This is because of me." "No." Nathan's voice was sharp. "This is because of Pike, because he sees something worth taking and thinks the world owes him whatever he wants. You're just the excuse." "Then let me go. Let me leave before someone gets hurt." "No." "Nathan." "No." He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. "You want to run? That's your choice. But don't do it because you think it'll save us. Pike doesn't stop when he gets what he wants. He just finds the next thing to take. Leon's throat tightened. Then what do I do? You stay. You work. And you trust that we're strong enough to hold what's ours. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Leon wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that strength could beat greed, that right could stand against money and power and men who thought the world bent to their will. But she'd learned on the frontier that wanting didn't make things true. Still, she nodded. I'll stay. Nathan's expression softened just slightly. Good, because we need you here. He went inside, leaving Leanne on the porch as darkness fell over the valley. She stood there for a long time, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for a night that felt more like a siege. Somewhere in the hills, Pike was watching, planning, waiting for the moment when their defenses cracked. And Leanne made a silent promise to herself that when that moment came, she wouldn't be the crack. She'd be the one holding the line, even if it cost her everything. The night passed without sleep for most of the ranch. Leanne stayed in the barn with the rifle Caleb had given her, watching the darkness through the open door while her mind raced through scenarios she couldn't control. Every sound felt amplified, the wind rattling the roof boards, horses shifting nervously in their stalls, the creak of someone's boots on the bunkhouse porch. She'd lived through hard times before, but this was different. This wasn't poverty or loneliness. This was danger with a name and a face, circling closer with every passing hour. Dawn came gray and cold, painting the valley in shades of ash. Leanne emerged from the barn to find Nathan already in the yard, talking quietly with Garrett. Both men looked like they'd aged overnight, their faces lined with exhaustion and something harder. Anger, maybe. Or the cold calculation that came before violence. Nathan saw her and walked over. You get any rest? Some. It was a lie, but he didn't challenge it. Good. We're riding out to check the rest of the fences. Make sure Pike didn't hit us anywhere else. He paused, studying her face. You know how to handle a horse? Well enough. Then saddle up. I want you with us. Leanne blinked, surprised. Why? Because you've got eyes, and right now I need everyone watching. He turned toward the corral, then stopped. And because I meant what I said, you're part of this ranch. That means you ride with us when it matters. 20 minutes later, Leanne found herself on a sturdy mare named Bess, riding alongside Nathan and 3 ranch hands through the cold morning air. The landscape stretched out around them, vast and unforgiving, the kind of country that swallowed people who weren't careful. They rode in silence, each man scanning the horizon with practiced wariness. The northern fence line came into view an hour later. The damage was worse than Garrett had described. Someone hadn't just cut the wire. They'd torn down an entire section of posts, leaving a gap wide enough to drive cattle through. Boot prints and hoof marks covered the ground, deliberately obvious, like a signature left in mud. Nathan dismounted and knelt by the broken posts, his jaw working. 20 head, maybe more. They knew exactly where to hit. Inside job? One of the hands asked. No. Nathan stood, his eyes hard. Pike's been scouting us for weeks. He knows this ranch better than we'd like to admit. Garrett spat into the dirt. We going after them or not? Not yet. Nathan swung back into his saddle. We fix the fence, reinforce the other sections, and we wait. Pike wants us chasing shadows. I'm not giving him the satisfaction. They worked through the morning, cutting new posts and stringing fresh wire. Leanne helped where she could, holding tools and learning how to twist the wire tight enough to hold against pressure. The men worked around her with the kind of focused efficiency that came from years of doing hard things together. Nobody complained. Nobody questioned Nathan's orders. By noon, the fence was repaired. It wouldn't stop a determined thief, but it would slow them down. Sometimes that was all you could hope for. They rode back to the ranch in grim silence. Leanne's hands ached from gripping the reins too tight, her back sore from the saddle. But beneath the physical discomfort was something else, a strange sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. These men were protecting something they'd built together, and now she was part of that protection. It wasn't comfort, it wasn't safety, but it was purpose, and purpose felt like oxygen after years of suffocating. That afternoon, Pike struck again. Leanne was working in the tack room when Caleb burst through the door, his face flushed with anger. Fire! Southeast pasture. She dropped her tools and ran. Smoke rose in a black column against the sky, visible from half a mile away. By the time she reached the scene, Nathan and the hands were already there, beating at flames that licked through the dry grass with hungry speed. The fire had started near a stand of scrub brush, spreading fast in the wind. Leanne grabbed a blanket from someone's saddle and joined the fight, dropping to her knees and smothering flames wherever they reached. The smoke stung her eyes, filling her lungs with acrid heat. Around her, men shouted orders and curses, their voices raw with effort. It took an hour to contain the blaze. When it was finally out, they stood in a circle of blackened earth, coughing and covered in soot, staring at the damage. 10 acres burned. Could have been worse. Could have been the whole ranch if the wind had shifted. Nathan walked the perimeter, his boots crunching on charred grass. He found what he was looking for near the brush line, an oil-soaked rag tied to a stick, deliberately placed. He held it up for everyone to see. Not lightning, not accident. The men's faces darkened. One of them, an older hand named Marcus, shook his head slowly. Pike's playing for keeps. So are we. Nathan tossed the rag aside. Double watch again tonight, and I want someone riding the property line every 4 hours. If Pike's men come back, I want to know before they light the match. The hands dispersed, their exhaustion replaced by something harder. Leanne stood beside the burned earth, feeling the heat still radiating from the ground. Pike wasn't testing them anymore. He was trying to break them, and every attack brought them closer to the moment when Nathan would have to choose between backing down or fighting back. She knew which choice he'd make. Men like Nathan didn't back down. That night, Leanne sat on the porch of the house at Nathan's invitation, both of them too wired to sleep. The stars were bright overhead, indifferent to the small war being waged below. Nathan leaned against the railing, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. "You ever think about leaving?" Leanne asked quietly. "The ranch?" "Any of it, the frontier, the fighting, all of it." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "Every winter," he said finally. "When the snow's so deep you can't see the fence posts and the cattle are dying and you're burning furniture just to keep warm. Every winter I think about selling out, heading east where life's easier." He took a sip of cold coffee. "Then spring comes, and the grass grows back, and I remember why I stayed." "Why did you?" "Because easy isn't the same as good." He looked at her, his eyes catching the starlight. "And because some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight's hard." Well, Leanne understood that. She'd spent 2 years choosing the hard path because the easy one felt like surrender. Now she was choosing it again, standing beside a man she barely knew against an enemy who had every advantage. "Pike's not going to stop," she said. "No." "So what do we do?" Nathan set down his cup. "We make him regret starting." Before Leanne could ask what that meant, Garrett appeared from the darkness, his expression urgent. "Riders, 4 of them, coming up the main road." Nathan was on his feet instantly. "Armed?" "Can't tell yet, but they're not hiding." They moved quickly to the yard, where the ranch hands were already gathering, rifles in hand. Leanne stayed close to Nathan, her heart pounding against her ribs. Through the darkness, she could see torches approaching, bobbing like fireflies in the night. The riders stopped just outside the gate. In the flickering light, Leanne recognized Trent, Pike's man from before. But this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him sat Victor Pike himself, mounted on a gray stallion that looked like it cost more than the entire ranch. Pike was older than his voice had suggested, maybe 55, with silver hair and the kind of face that had learned to hide cruelty behind charm. He smiled as Nathan approached the gate, the expression pleasant and utterly false. "Nathan Cole, good to see you. Get off my property, Pike." "Now, that's hardly neighborly." Pike's smile widened. "I came to talk. Surely you can spare a few minutes for conversation." "We've got nothing to talk about." "I think we do." Pike's gaze shifted to Leanne, standing in the shadows behind Nathan. "Especially about your new employee, Mrs. Chen, isn't it? I've been trying to reach you, but you seem determined to ignore my offers." Leanne stepped forward into the torchlight. "I'm not interested in anything you're offering." "Are you sure? Because from where I'm sitting, this ranch is having a run of very bad luck. Lost cattle, fires. Who knows what might happen next?" His tone was conversational, almost friendly. Seems to me you'd be safer working for someone with the resources to protect you. I'm protected just fine. Pike's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. For now. But protection is expensive, Mrs. Chen, and I wonder how long Mr. Cole can afford it, what with all these unfortunate accidents eating into his profits. Nathan's hand moved to the rifle at his side. You threatening me? Threatening? Pike looked genuinely shocked. Not at all. I'm simply observing that frontier life is dangerous. Things happen. People get hurt. He paused. Or they make smart choices and avoid unnecessary suffering. The only smart choice is you leaving. Now. Pike sighed, like Nathan was a disappointing student. I tried to do this the civilized way. Offered fair employment, extended courtesy, even sent gifts. All rejected. That's your right, of course. But you should know that my patience isn't infinite. Neither is mine. For a moment, the two men stared at each other across the gate, the air thick with unspoken violence. Then Pike pulled his horse around, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Think about what I said, Mrs. Chen, he called over his shoulder. My offer stands. For now. The four riders disappeared into the darkness, their torches fading like dying stars. The ranch stood in silence, tension coiled so tight it felt like the air itself might snap. Nathan turned to the men. No one sleeps tonight. I want eyes everywhere, guns loaded, and if you see anything that doesn't belong, you sound the alarm. The hands scattered to their positions. Leon stood rooted to the spot, her hands trembling with adrenaline she couldn't release. He's going to burn us out, she said quietly. Nathan looked at her, his expression grim. Probably, but he's going to have to work for it. They spent the night in shifts, watching and waiting. Leon took her turn in the barn, the rifle across her lap, jumping at every sound. But the attack didn't come. Pike was playing a longer game, letting fear do the work violence would finish. Dawn brought no relief. The men were exhausted, their nerves frayed. Nathan called a meeting in the yard, his face hard with decision. Pike's trying to wear us down, he said. Make us so tired and scared that we break before he has to fire a shot. But here's what he doesn't understand. We've all lived through worse than him. Worse winters, worse losses, worse odds. He looked at each man in turn. If you want to leave, leave now. No shame in it. But if you stay knowing this is going to get uglier before it gets better. Nobody moved. Garrett spoke up first. We're with you, boss. The other hands nodded, their faces set with the kind of stubborn determination that kept men alive on the frontier. They weren't doing this for Leon, she knew. They were doing it for Nathan, for the ranch, for the principle that you didn't let bullies win just because they had money and men. But she was part of that equation now, whether she wanted to be or not. The day passed in tense preparation. They moved ammunition into the house, reinforced the barn doors, filled barrels with water in case of fire. Leon worked alongside the men, her hands busy even as her mind churned with guilt. All of this was because Pike wanted her, because she'd made 2 saddles and caught the attention of a man who thought he could own anything. Late in the afternoon, Caleb found her checking the locks on the tack room for the 3rd time. You're going to wear out the hinges, he said gently. Lynn set down the padlock. I should leave. Just go. Maybe Pike would leave the ranch alone if I wasn't here. And maybe wolves would stop hunting if the deer just lay down and died. Caleb leaned against the wall, his usual smile absent. Pike doesn't want you, Mrs. Chen. Not really. He wants to prove he can take whatever he wants. You're just convenient. That doesn't make me feel better. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to make you angry. He pushed off the wall, meeting her eyes. You know what I see when I look at you? Someone who walked into a store with everything to lose and still demanded fair value. Someone who fixed things everyone else said were broken. Someone who stayed when running would have been easier. He paused. Pike sees that too, and it scares him, because people like you remind people like him that money isn't the same as strength. Leon's throat tightened. I don't feel strong. Neither does anyone else. We just pretend better. Caleb's crooked smile finally returned. Come on, Nathan wants everyone at the house for supper. Says if we're going to have a siege, we might as well eat together. Supper was a strange affair. 20 people crowded into the main room, eating beans and cornbread and trying to ignore the rifles stacked by the door. The conversation was subdued but not defeated. These men had lived through droughts and blizzards and Indian raids and market crashes. One rich man with a grudge wasn't enough to break their spirit. Leon sat between Caleb and Marcus, listening to stories about the ranch's history, the hard years and the good ones, the times they'd almost lost everything and somehow held on. She realized she was hearing a kind of prayer, secular and rough-edged, a way of reminding themselves why they fought. After the meal, Nathan stood. The room fell quiet. Pike thinks we're weak because we're tired. He thinks we'll fold because it's easier than standing. But he's wrong about us. We're still here because we don't quit, and we're not quitting now. His gaze swept the room, landing on each face. Whatever comes, we face it together. And when it's over, this ranch will still be standing. The men responded with grim nods and quiet affirmations. It wasn't a rousing speech. It didn't need to be. These were men who valued actions over words, and Nathan's actions had earned their loyalty long before this crisis began. The meeting broke up slowly. Leanne helped clear plates, her movements automatic while her mind replayed Nathan's words. When it's over, the ranch will still be standing. He spoke like survival was certain, like will alone could hold back fire and theft and violence. She wanted to believe him. The attack came at midnight. Leanne woke to shouting and the smell of smoke. She grabbed her rifle and ran outside, her heart hammering in her chest. The western barn was burning, flames climbing the walls in sheets of orange and red. Men were already running with buckets, forming a chain from the well, but the fire was spreading faster than they could fight it. Through the chaos, Leon saw riders in the darkness beyond the fence line, 4, maybe 5, watching the destruction they'd caused. One of them held a torch, and as she watched, he threw it toward the main house. The torch fell short, landing in the dirt and sputtering out. But the message was clear. Nathan appeared beside her, his face illuminated by firelight. Get to the house, now. I can help. The house. That's an order. Leon ran. Behind her, she heard Nathan shouting orders, organizing the men into teams, half fighting the fire, half watching for another attack. The smoke was thick now, stinging her eyes and filling her lungs. She reached the porch just as another torch arced through the air, this one landing on the roof. The dry shingles caught immediately, flames spreading like water. Garrett appeared with a ladder. Get up there. We need to stop it before it reaches the main beam. Leon didn't think. She climbed, her hands slipping on the rungs, her fear buried beneath the urgency of survival. On the roof, she beat at the flames with a wet blanket, the heat searing her face and hands. Beside her, Marcus did the same, both of them working in desperate silence. Below, the barn fire was losing its battle. The men had created a firebreak, and without new fuel, the flames were dying. But the house was still in danger, the fire spreading toward the chimney where it could drop into the walls. There! Marcus shouted, pointing to a section that was fully engulfed. We've got to cut it away! They hacked at the burning shingles with axes, throwing them off the roof in flaming pieces. The smoke was suffocating, and Lion's vision blurred with tears and ash. But she kept working, kept fighting, because stopping meant losing everything. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably minutes, the fire was contained. Leon sat on the roof, gasping for air, her hands blistered and shaking. Below, the western barn was a smoking ruin, its frame collapsed inward like a broken skeleton. But the house was saved, and the men were still standing. Nathan climbed up beside her, his face black with soot. You all right? Leon nodded, not trusting her voice. Good work. He looked out over the ranch at the destruction Pike had caused. This is what he wanted. To burn us out, break our spirit, make us too scared to stand. Did it work? Nathan's expression hardened. No. All he did was prove he's afraid to face us head on. He stood, offering her a hand. Come on, we've got cleanup to do. They worked through the rest of the night, putting out hot spots and salvaging what they could from the barn. The animals had been moved in time, but equipment was lost. Tools, leather, feed. Months of work and investment gone in minutes. As dawn broke, the men stood in the yard, faces grim with exhaustion and anger. They'd won the battle but lost ground, and everyone knew Pike would be back. Nathan gathered them together, his voice rough from smoke. Today we rebuild. Tomorrow we fortify. And the next time Pike comes, we'll be ready. Ready how? Garrett asked. Nathan's smile was cold. We stop playing defense. We take the fight to him. Leon felt something shift in the air, a collective decision forming. These men had been pushed too far. Now they were pushing back. Whatever came next would be bloody, but it would also be final. The morning after the fire, Leon stood in the ruins of the western barn, surveying the damage. The structure was beyond saving, but pieces could be salvaged. Hinges, nails, boards that weren't fully charred. She began sorting through the wreckage, her hands moving automatically while her mind worked through everything that had happened. Pike had escalated. That meant he was either supremely confident or getting desperate. Both options were dangerous. Nathan found her around noon carrying 2 canteens of water. He handed her one without speaking, and they drank in silence, standing in the ash. "I'm riding into town this afternoon," he said finally. "Going to talk to the sheriff." Leon lowered her canteen. "Will he help?" "Probably not. Pike owns half the businesses in town, and the sheriff knows it. But I need to put this on record. Make it official that we're under attack." He paused. "I want you to come with me." "Why?" "Because Pike's been making this about you. If you're there, you can tell your side. Make it harder for him to spin lies." Leon nodded slowly. "When do we leave?" 2 hours. Clean up first. We need to look like people worth listening to, not refugees from a war. The ride to town was tense. Nathan brought Garrett and 2 other hands as escort, all of them armed and watchful. They rode in formation like soldiers expecting ambush. The town came into view just after 3, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a main street. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone and secrets lasted about as long as morning dew. People stopped to watch them pass, their faces carefully neutral. The sheriff's office was a small building near the general store. Nathan tied his horse and turned to the men. "Wait here, this won't take long." Inside, Sheriff Hayes sat behind a scarred desk, a heavy-set man with gray mutton chops and tired eyes. He looked up when they entered, his expression going carefully blank. "Cole?" "Mrs. Chen." His voice was neutral, professional. "What can I do for you?" Nathan laid out the facts with brutal efficiency. The stolen cattle, the cut fences, the fires. He didn't embellish, didn't accuse directly, just presented the evidence and let it speak. Hayes listened without interrupting. When Nathan finished, the sheriff leaned back in his chair, his face troubled. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's a report. I'm telling you my property's been attacked, and I want it documented." "You got proof it was Pike?" "His men were seen on my land the night of the first fire. I've got witnesses." Hayes sighed, rubbing his face. "Nathan, you know how this works. Pike's a powerful man. Without concrete evidence, so we're supposed to just let him burn us out?" "I'm not saying that." Hayes' voice hardened slightly. "I'm saying you need proof I can use in court. Otherwise, it's your word against his, and his word carries weight in this town." Nathan's jaw worked. "What would you consider proof?" "Catch them in the act. Get a witness who will testify. Find something that ties Pike directly to the attacks." Hayes spread his hands. "Otherwise, I can't help you." The silence stretched out, thick with frustration. Finally, Leon spoke. "He offered me employment," she said quietly. "Sent his men to the ranch with letters and gifts. When I refused, the attack started." Hayes looked at her with something like sympathy. "That's circumstantial, Mrs. Chen. Doesn't prove he ordered the attacks. But it shows motive." "Maybe, but motive isn't evidence." Nathan stood abruptly. "So we're on our own." "I didn't say that. I said I need more to act on." Hayes stood too, meeting Nathan's eyes. "Look, I know Pike's methods. I know what he is, but I can't arrest a man on suspicion. Bring me something solid, and I'll move. Until then, all I can tell you is to defend your property and try not to kill anyone in the process." It was the best they were going to get. Nathan knew it, and so did Leon. They left the office in silence. Outside, the town felt hostile now, full of eyes that looked away too quickly and whispers that followed them like shadows. On the ride back, Nathan was quiet, his expression dark. Finally, he spoke. "Pike's counting on the law being useless. He's right." "So what do we do?" Leon asked. Nathan looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the answer before he spoke it. "We make our own justice." The words should have frightened her. Instead, they felt like permission. That night, Nathan gathered the men in the barn for a meeting. The mood was different now, not defensive, but aggressive, men ready to stop waiting and start acting. Pike thinks he can bleed us out, Nathan said. He's wrong. Starting tomorrow, we're going on offense. Garrett, I want eyes on Pike's ranch. Know his routines, count his men, find his weaknesses. Caleb, you're in charge of reinforcing our defenses, trenches, barricades, anything that makes us harder to burn. Marcus, inventory our ammunition and make sure everyone's armed. He turned to Leanne. And you're going to keep doing what you do best. Build, fix. Show Pike that every attack makes us stronger, not weaker. The men nodded, their faces set with purpose. We're done being victims, Nathan continued. Pike wants a war. He's got one. But it's going to be fought on our terms, on our land. And when it's over, we're still going to be standing. It wasn't a question. It was a vow. And every man in that barn knew the cost of breaking it. The shift from defense to offense changed everything. The ranch transformed overnight from a place under siege to a fortress preparing for battle. Garrett and 2 others rode out before dawn the next morning, disappearing into the hills toward Pike's range with orders to watch and report. Caleb organized the remaining hands into work crews, digging shallow trenches around the main buildings and stacking barrels of water at strategic points. Marcus inventoried ammunition and distributed rifles to men who'd never carried them while working. Leanne threw herself into rebuilding. She salvaged what she could from the burned barn and began constructing a new storage shed closer to the house, somewhere the animals could shelter if another attack came at night. Her hands were raw from the fire, blistered and slow to heal, but she worked through the pain. Physical work kept her mind from spinning through all the ways this could end badly. 3 days passed. The ranch held its breath. On the 4th morning, Garrett returned with news. He found Nathan in the yard, his face grim with exhaustion and purpose. Pike's got 8 men on his payroll, Garrett said, swinging down from his horse, plus Trent and 2 others who look like hired muscle. They're armed, but they're not soldiers. Most of them are just ranch hands taking extra pay. Nathan absorbed this information with a slow nod. Routines? Pike rides into town every Tuesday and Friday, takes the main road, usually just him and Trent. The rest stay back to work the ranch. Garrett paused. His place is bigger than ours, better fortified, but he's spread thin. Most of his men are watching his northern range where he runs the bulk of his cattle. Of vulnerabilities? His water supply comes from a single creek. If someone were to divert it or foul it, he'd have problems. Garrett's expression was carefully neutral. Not saying we should, just saying it's there. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. We're not poisoning wells. That's a line we don't cross. Then what do? We make him come to us. On our terms, where we're ready. Nathan looked toward the hills where Pike's ranch lay hidden beyond the ridges. He's been hitting us at night, in secret, where we can't prove anything. We're going to force him into daylight, make him own what he's doing. How? Nathan's smile was cold. We give him something he can't resist taking. That afternoon, Nathan called another meeting. This time, Leanne was at the center of it. Pike wants you, Nathan said bluntly. He's been circling around it, using attacks to pressure us, but what he really wants is to prove he can take whatever he wants. So we're going to let him think he can. Leanne's stomach tightened. I don't understand. We're going to bait him, put you in town, visible and vulnerable, with a story that you're leaving the ranch because it's too dangerous. Pike will make a move, and when he does, we'll be ready. You want to use me as bait. I want to end this before someone gets killed. Nathan's voice was firm, but not unkind. Pike's been operating in shadows because it gives him deniability. We bring him into the light, we can prove what he's doing, get witnesses, force the sheriff to act. Caleb spoke up from the corner. That's assuming Pike takes the bait and doesn't just send his men to finish burning us out while we're in town. That's why half of you stay here, Nathan said, fortified and ready. If Pike splits his forces, we've got the advantage either way. The plan was dangerous. It relied on Pike acting predictably, on the sheriff actually caring about evidence, on nothing going wrong in the dozen ways things could go wrong. But it was also the only offensive move they had that didn't involve outright violence. Leanne looked at Nathan, then at the faces of the men around her. They were waiting for her decision. She could refuse, could say it was too risky, too much to ask. But she knew what happened to people who waited for safety on the frontier. They waited forever, or they died waiting. "When do we do this?" she asked. Nathan's expression softened with something like relief. "Tomorrow. You'll take the wagon into town, stay at the boarding house. Make it look like you're packing to leave. Pike will hear about it within hours. And then? Then we wait for him to make his move. And when he does, we've got witnesses ready to see it." The meeting dispersed slowly, men filtering back to their tasks with the weight of what was coming pressing on their shoulders. Leanne stayed behind, her mind racing through scenarios. Nathan approached her quietly. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." Leanne met his eyes. "Pike made this about me. I'm not going to hide while other people fight my battles. It's not just your battle anymore. Maybe not. But it started with me, and I'm going to help finish it." Nathan studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll keep you safe. I promise you that." Leanne wanted to believe him, but promises on the frontier were fragile things, easily broken by men with guns and bad intentions. That night, she packed a small bag with her few belongings, moving slowly through the ritual of preparation. The wooden box with the photograph went in first, then her spare dress, her tools. She folded each item carefully, trying not to think about whether she'd be coming back to the ranch or leaving it forever. There was a knock on the barn door. Caleb stepped inside, carrying 2 cups of coffee and his crooked smile. "Thought you might need some company," he said, handing her a cup. Leanne accepted it gratefully, warming her hands on the tin. "Can't sleep?" "Nobody can. Whole ranch is wired tighter than a spring." He leaned against the wall, his usual humor tempered by something more serious. "You scared?" "Terrified." "Good. Means you're smart." He took a sip of coffee. "For what it's worth, I think you're brave as hell. Most people would have run the minute Pike showed his face." "Running just means he wins." "Maybe. Or maybe it means you live to fight another day." Caleb's expression grew thoughtful. "My pa used to say there's no shame in retreating if the ground's not worth holding. But I figure you've already decided this ground is worth it." Leanne thought about the wagon she'd fixed, the fence she'd helped repair, the roof she'd climbed to save from fire. She thought about the men who'd stopped seeing her as a burden and started seeing her as one of them. It wasn't home, not quite, but it was the closest thing she'd had in years. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I have." They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, 2 people on the edge of something dangerous, finding small comfort in not being alone. When Caleb finally left, Leanne lay down on her cot and closed her eyes, knowing sleep wouldn't come, but needing to rest anyway. Tomorrow would demand everything she had. She needed to be ready. Dawn came too soon and not soon enough. Leanne dressed carefully, choosing her better dress, the one that didn't have patches or stains from work. She needed to look like a woman making a decision, not a refugee fleeing disaster. Nathan had the wagon ready when she emerged, the mare already hitched and stamping impatiently. "Marcus and Caleb will follow at a distance," Nathan said, checking the harness one final time. "They'll be in town, watching. If anything happens, they'll be close." "And you?" "I'll be at the ranch, making sure Pike doesn't try hitting us while we're divided." He turned to face her fully. "Leanne, if this goes wrong, if Pike does something we don't expect, you run. Don't try to be brave, just run, and we'll find you." She nodded, not trusting her voice. Nathan helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hand steady and warm on her arm. "We end this today," he said quietly, "one way or another." Leanne clicked the reins and the mare started forward. She didn't look back at the ranch, afraid that if she did, she'd lose her nerve. Instead, she kept her eyes on the road ahead, on the town that had dismissed her and the man who thought he could own her, and the fragile hope that justice might actually exist in a place where money usually won. The ride took 2 hours. Leanne spent it rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd act, trying to become the frightened widow Pike expected to see. It wasn't hard. Most of it wasn't acting at all. The town appeared on the horizon, its buildings small and scattered against the vast sky. Leanne guided the wagon down the main street, feeling eyes on her immediately. A woman didn't travel alone without it being noticed. She pulled up in front of the boarding house, the same place she'd stayed before Nathan had changed everything. Mrs. Henley, the landlady, appeared on the porch, her expression cautiously welcoming. "Mrs. Chen, didn't expect to see you back." "I need a room," Lian said, keeping her voice quiet and defeated. "Just for a few days while I make arrangements." "Mrs." Henley's eyes sharpened with curiosity. "Leaving the Cole Ranch? It's not safe there anymore." Lian climbed down from the wagon, letting exhaustion show in her movements. "There's been trouble. I can't stay." The landlady's expression shifted to something like sympathy mixed with satisfaction. People always liked being right about other people's failures. "Well, you can have your old room, same rate as before." Lian paid for 3 days and carried her bag inside. The room was exactly as she remembered, small, dim, smelling of old wood and defeat. She set her bag on the bed and sat down, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. She didn't have to wait long. Within an hour, she heard horses outside. Through the thin curtain, she saw Trent and another of Pike's men riding past, their gazes sweeping the street. They'd been told to watch for her. That meant Pike knew she was here. The trap was set. Lian stayed in her room through the afternoon, only emerging once to buy supplies at the general store. Miller was there, his expression smug when he saw her. "Back so soon, Mrs. Chen? Cole's ranch didn't work out?" "No." She kept her voice small, defeated. "It didn't." "Shame. Though I did warn you about getting mixed up with him, Cole's always been trouble." Miller leaned on his counter, his tone falsely sympathetic. "You got plans now?" "I'm looking for work, somewhere safer." "Well, you might want to talk to Mr. Pike. Heard he's been looking for someone with your skills." Miller's smile widened. "Pays well, too. Better than ranch wages, that's certain." Lian forced herself to look interested. "Where would I find him?" "He'll find you, more like. Word travels fast in a town this size." Miller chuckled. "Give it a day. He'll come calling." Lian bought flour and coffee she didn't need and walked back to the boarding house, her skin crawling with the feeling of being watched. Somewhere in the town, Caleb and Marcus were observing, ready to move if things went wrong. But she couldn't see them, couldn't draw comfort from their presence. She was alone, and alone was where Pike wanted her. Evening fell. Lian sat in her room, the lamp burning low, trying to read a book Mrs. Henley had lent her. But the words wouldn't stick. Her mind kept circling back to what Pike might do, how he'd approach, whether Nathan's plan would work, or if she'd just volunteered to be kidnapped, or worse. The knock came just after dark. Lian's heart jumped into her throat. She set down the book and smoothed her dress, forcing her breathing to steady. Then she opened the door. Trent stood in the hallway, his hat in his hands, his expression polite and empty. "Mrs. Chen, Mr. Pike would like a word with you, if you're willing." "Now?" "He's staying at the hotel, just across the street. Won't take but a few minutes of your time." Trent's smile was practiced. "He heard you might be looking for new employment." This was it, the moment where Pike thought he'd won, where a desperate widow would accept his offer because she had no other choice. Lian made herself hesitate, made herself look uncertain. "I suppose I could talk to him," she said quietly. "Wonderful. I'll escort you over." They walked across the street in the twilight, past windows glowing with lamplight and doors closing against the night. The hotel was the finest building in town, 3 stories of painted wood with a restaurant on the ground floor. Trent led her upstairs to a private room where Victor Pike sat in an upholstered chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He stood when she entered, his smile warm and victorious. "Mrs. Chen, thank you for coming." Lian stayed near the door, her hands clasped in front of her. "Mr. Trent said you wanted to speak with me." "I did indeed. Please sit." Pike gestured to a chair across from him. "Can I offer you anything? Tea, perhaps, or something stronger?" "No, thank you." Pike's smile never wavered. He waited until she sat, then settled back into his own chair with the ease of a man who'd already won. "I heard you left the Cole Ranch. Smart decision. That place is a powder keg waiting to explode." Lian said nothing, letting the silence stretch. "I also heard you're looking for work," Pike continued, "which brings me to why I wanted to speak with you. My offer still stands, Mrs. Chen. In fact, I'm prepared to improve it. $50 a month, room and board included, and the security of working for a legitimate operation instead of a failing ranch run by a stubborn man with more pride than sense. That's generous. It's fair compensation for quality work. Pike leaned forward slightly. And it's a way out of a dangerous situation. Cole's made enemies, Mrs. Chen, men who won't stop until he's broken. You don't want to be caught in that crossfire. Men like you? The question hung in the air. Pike's expression flickered, something cold passing behind his eyes before the charm returned. I'm a businessman. I don't make enemies. I make offers. What people do with those offers is their choice. And the fires? The stolen cattle? Those were offers too? Pike's smile widened, but it no longer reached his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, but I do know that bad things happen to people who make poor choices. Cole chose to stand between me and something I wanted. That was poor judgment on his part. He paid for the saddles fairly. This was never about the saddles. Pike set down his whiskey glass with deliberate care. This is about understanding how the world works. Power, Mrs. Chen. Resources. The ability to take what you want and keep what you take. Cole doesn't have that. I do. And I'm offering to extend that protection to you if you're smart enough to accept it. Lian felt rage building in her chest, hot and bright. This man had burned their barn, terrorized the ranch, threatened people who'd shown her nothing but fairness, and now he sat here acting like it was all just business. Like people were commodities to be bought and sold and discarded when they stopped being useful. And if I refuse? She asked quietly. Pike's expression hardened. Then you go back to Cole's failing ranch and you burn with it. Because make no mistake, Mrs. Chen, that place is coming down. The only question is whether you're inside when it happens. That sounds like a threat. It's a prediction, based on observable facts and the natural consequences of poor decisions. Pike stood, walking to the window. I tried to do this the civilized way, offered employment, extended courtesy. But Cole's made it clear he'd rather fight than negotiate. So now things get uglier. And when they do, I want you to remember that you had a chance to walk away clean. Lian stood as well, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. I'm not interested in your offer, Mr. Pike. Not now, not ever. Pike turned to face her, and the mask of civility finally dropped. What remained was cold calculation and barely controlled anger. You're making a mistake. Then it's mine to make. For now. Pike's voice dropped to something dangerous. But mistakes on the frontier have consequences, Mrs. Chen, and those consequences tend to be permanent. Lian walked to the door, her heart pounding, but her steps measured. She reached for the handle, then stopped, looking back at Pike one final time. You're right about one thing, she said. Power matters on this frontier, but you're wrong about what kind. Real power isn't about money or hired men or burning people out. It's about standing when everyone expects you to fall. And I'm still standing. She left before he could respond, walking down the hallway with her head high and her hands shaking. Trent was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, his expression unreadable. I trust the meeting was productive, he said. Lian didn't answer. She walked past him, out into the street, back toward the boarding house. Behind her, she felt Pike's anger like heat from a forge, ready to be shaped into violence. She'd refused him. In front of a witness, in clear terms, with no room for misinterpretation. Now the real danger began. She made it back to her room and locked the door, her breath coming fast and shallow. Through the window she could see the hotel, Pike's silhouette moving behind the curtained glass. She'd baited him, just like Nathan planned. Now they had to see if he'd strike. An hour passed. Then another. Lian sat on the bed, the rifle Caleb had given her lying across her lap, waiting. The attack came just before midnight. Lian heard boots on the stairs, multiple sets, moving with purpose. She grabbed the rifle and moved away from the door, positioning herself in the corner where she'd have a clear shot if they came through. The door shook with a heavy blow. Then another. The lock splintered on the third hit, and Trent stepped through with two other men behind him. Mr. Pike wants to see you again, Mrs. Chen, and this time it's not a request. Lian raised the rifle, her hands surprisingly steady. Get out. Trent's expression didn't change. Put that down before someone gets hurt. I said get out. One of the men behind Trent started forward. Lian pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the small room and her aim was wild, but it did what she needed. It bought time and made noise. The man stumbled back, unhurt but shocked. Trent swore and reached for his gun. The window shattered as Caleb came through it, his own rifle leveled. "Nobody moves!" Marcus appeared in the doorway behind Pike's men, cutting off their escape. "Drop your weapons, now!" For a frozen moment, nobody moved. Then slowly, Trent raised his hands. The other men followed suit, their guns clattering to the floor. Footsteps pounded on the stairs. Sheriff Hayes appeared, his face flushed and his gun drawn. Behind him came half the town, drawn by the gunshot. "What in the hell is going on here?" Hayes demanded. Caleb kept his rifle trained on Trent. "These men just broke into Mrs. Chen's room and attempted to abduct her. We've got multiple witnesses." Hayes looked at the splintered door, the armed men, Leon standing in the corner with her rifle. His expression hardened. "That true, Trent?" "This is a misunderstanding," Trent said carefully. "Mr. Pike sent us to extend another invitation." "By breaking down her door at midnight?" Hayes' voice was iron. "That's kidnapping, not an invitation." "We have authority. You have nothing." Hayes moved forward, his gun still raised. "You're under arrest. All three of you. Conspiracy to kidnap, breaking and entering, assault." Trent's face went pale. Pike can come talk to me in the morning. Right now, you're going to jail." Hayes looked at his deputy, who'd appeared in the hallway. "Get them out of here." As the men were led away, Hayes turned to Leon. "You all right, Mrs. Chen?" Leon lowered her rifle, her hands finally starting to shake. "I'm fine." "Good, because I'm going to need you to make a statement." Hayes looked at Caleb and Marcus. "All of you, what happened here tonight is going on record, and Pike's going to answer for it." It was over. Not the war, maybe, but this battle. Pike had moved in the open, with witnesses, and the law had no choice but to act. Nathan's plan had worked. The next morning, Pike came to the sheriff's office. Leon watched from across the street as he entered, his face a mask of controlled rage. He stayed inside for an hour, his voice occasionally audible through the windows, raised in indignation and threats. When he emerged, Sheriff Hayes was with him, and the sheriff's expression was harder than Leon had ever seen it. "Your men are being charged," Hayes said flatly, "and I'm opening an investigation into the fires and thefts at the Cole Ranch. You're not to go near that property or Mrs. Chen. If you do, I'll arrest you myself." Pike's smile was thin and dangerous. "This isn't over, Sheriff." "No, but it's changed." Hayes' hand rested on his gun. "You've been operating in shadows, Pike. Now you're in daylight, and in daylight, the law can see what you're doing." Pike looked across the street, his gaze finding Leon standing in front of the boarding house. For a long moment, their eyes met. Then he turned and walked away, his shoulders rigid with fury. Leon felt no triumph, only exhaustion and the knowledge that wounded animals were often more dangerous than healthy ones. Nathan arrived in town that afternoon with Garrett and the rest of the hands. He found Laan in her room, packing her few belongings. "It's done?" he asked. "For now." Leanne folded her spare dress carefully. "Trent and the others are in jail. Hayes is investigating. Pike's been warned off." "Good." Nathan leaned against the doorframe, his expression tired but satisfied. "You did well. Took courage to face him like that." I was terrified. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it." He pushed off the doorframe. "Come on. Let's go home." Home. The word settled into Leon's chest like something warm and solid. The ranch wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. But it was where she belonged. Beside people who'd stood with her when standing was dangerous. They rode back together as the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. The valley opened before them, wide and beautiful and hard. The kind of country that broke some people and forged others into something stronger. Leon knew which one she was becoming. And for the first time since her husband died, she felt like the person she was becoming might actually be someone worth being. The ranch appeared on the horizon, its buildings weathered but standing, smoke rising from the chimney in a thin line against the blue sky. It looked like survival, like stubbornness, like home. And Leon rode toward it with her head high, ready for whatever came next. The ride back to the ranch felt different than any journey Leon had taken before. The landscape was the same, rolling hills giving way to the valley basin, scrub brush dotting the earth like punctuation marks in a sentence written by wind and time. But something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't running anymore, wasn't hiding. She was returning to a place that had become hers not through inheritance or marriage, but through the simple, stubborn act of staying when leaving would have been easier. Nathan rode beside her, his silence comfortable rather than heavy. Behind them, Garrett and the other hands followed in loose formation, their vigilance unchanged despite the victory in town. They all knew what Leon was beginning to understand, that wounded pride was more dangerous than open aggression, and Pike's pride had been wounded publicly. The ranch came into full view as they crested the final ridge. Leon could see the charred remains of the western barn, a black scar on the landscape that would take months to fully heal. But she could also see the new storage shed she'd built, the reinforced fences, the water barrels positioned strategically around the buildings. Damage and recovery, side by side, testament to what the frontier demanded and what people could build despite those demands. Caleb was waiting in the yard when they arrived, his crooked smile firmly in place. "Heard you gave Pike hell in town. Wish I could have seen his face when Hayes dragged his men to jail." "You were busy saving my life," Leon said, swinging down from the wagon. "I'll consider us even." "Fair enough." Caleb's expression grew more serious. Word's spreading fast. Half the town's talking about what happened. Other half's probably reporting back to Pike. Nathan dismounted, handing his reins to one of the hands. "Let them talk. The more witnesses to Pike's methods, the harder it'll be for him to operate." "You think Hayes will actually prosecute?" "I think Hayes finally has enough evidence that ignoring it would cost him his job." Nathan looked toward the hills where Pike's ranch lay beyond sight. "But prosecution takes time. And Pike's not the waiting type." The words settled over the group like a forecast of bad weather. They'd won the battle in town, but the war wasn't over. Pike had too much invested, too much pride at stake, to simply walk away because 3 of his men were in jail. That night, Nathan doubled the watch again and called a meeting in the main house. The room was crowded with ranch hands, some sitting, others standing against the walls, all of them wearing expressions that had moved beyond exhaustion into something harder. They'd been living under siege for weeks now, and it showed in the lines around their eyes, the tension in their shoulders. "Pike's going to retaliate," Nathan said without preamble. "We humiliated him in front of the whole town. He can't let that stand without losing face, and men like Pike would rather burn everything down than admit weakness." "So, what's the play?" Marcus asked. "We can't live like this forever, waiting for the next attack." "No, we can't." Nathan leaned against the table, his arms crossed. "Which is why we're going to force his hand. Make him choose between backing down or committing to a fight he can't win quietly." Garrett shifted his weight. "How do we do that?" "We file a lawsuit. Damage claims for the stolen cattle, the burned barn, the attacks. We make it official, legal, public. Every merchant in town, every rancher in the valley will know that Pike's being sued for theft and arson." The room was silent for a moment as the men absorbed this. Then Caleb spoke up, his voice thoughtful. "That'll make him furious." "Yes." "Could push him into doing something stupid." "That's the idea?" Nathan's expression was grim. Right now, Pike's been operating with plausible deniability. He sends his men, they do the dirty work, he keeps his hands clean. But if we sue him directly, we're saying publicly that we know he's responsible. He'll have to either defend himself in court or silence us permanently. And silencing us permanently means coming at us openly, with witnesses, where the law can see. Leon understood the strategy. It was the same principle they'd used in town. Force Pike out of the shadows where his money and connections protected him, into the light where rules applied even to wealthy men. But it was also incredibly dangerous. Cornered animals fought the hardest. "I'll ride to Cheyenne tomorrow," Nathan continued. "File the papers, get the lawsuit started. While I'm gone, Garrett's in charge. Nobody leaves the ranch alone, nobody takes unnecessary risks. We maintain defensive positions and we wait." "How long?" someone asked. "Until Pike makes his move, or until the law does its job." Nathan straightened. "Either way, this ends soon." The meeting broke up with quiet determination. Leanne stayed behind as the men filed out, waiting until only she and Nathan remained. "This lawsuit," she said quietly, "it's because of me. It's because of Pike." Nathan's voice was firm. "You were just the excuse he used. If it hadn't been you, it would have been something else. Water rights, grazing land, a property dispute. Pike's been looking for a way to expand his holdings, and my ranch sits on good water. He would have come after us eventually. But I made it easier. Nathan walked to the window, looking out at the dark valley. You know what I see when I look at this place? My father's dream, built with his hands, sustained by his stubbornness. He died trying to make something permanent in a place that destroys most things people build. He turned to face her. You didn't make anything easier. You made it harder for Pike because you proved that people can't be bought or broken just because they're vulnerable. That's dangerous to men like him. It undermines everything he believes about how the world works. Leanne felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. So what happens now? Now we see if civilization works on the frontier, or if might still makes right. Nathan's smile was tired. And we hope the answer is better than we fear. He left for Cheyenne before dawn, taking only Marcus with him for company. Leanne watched them ride out, two figures growing smaller against the vast landscape until they disappeared entirely. Then she turned back to the ranch and the work that never stopped, no matter what else was happening. The days that followed were tense with waiting. Garrett ran the ranch with quiet efficiency, keeping the men busy with repairs and maintenance while maintaining constant vigilance. Leanne threw herself into finishing the storage shed, working through the physical exhaustion that kept her mind from spinning through worst-case scenarios. On the third day, a rider appeared on the ridge. Not Pike's men, but a stranger on a dusty horse carrying papers in a leather satchel. He stopped at the ranch gate, and Garrett went out to meet him. Leanne watched from the barn as they talked, saw Garrett's expression darken, saw him take the papers and read them carefully. When the rider left, Garrett walked directly to her. Pike's countersuing, he said flatly, claiming Nathan owes him for breach of contract, says there was an agreement about those saddles you made and Nathan interfered with a business arrangement. He's demanding compensation and legal fees. Leanne's stomach dropped. That's a lie. I never had any agreement with Pike. Doesn't matter if it's a lie. It's a legal claim, filed proper. Garrett's jaw worked. Pike's playing the same game we are, using the law as a weapon. And he's got more money to throw at lawyers than we do. What do? We wait for Nathan to get back and we don't panic. Garrett looked toward the hills, his expression hard. And we stay ready because legal battles don't stop men like Pike from fighting dirty. He was right. That night, just after moonrise, the attack came. Leanne was in the barn when she heard the first gunshot, a sharp crack that split the night silence. She grabbed her rifle and ran outside, where chaos was already erupting. Men were shouting, running for cover, returning fire toward the ridge where muzzle flashes lit the darkness like distant lightning. Get down! Caleb tackled her behind a water barrel as bullets whined through the air above them. They're on the eastern ridge, maybe 6 or 7 shooters. Another volley of shots rang out, bullets thudding into wood and earth. This wasn't a nighttime raid designed to burn and run. This was a sustained attack meant to pin them down and break them. Garrett appeared, crouching low, his face grim in the moonlight. They've got us in a crossfire. Someone's on the western hill, too. How many total? At least a dozen. More than Pike's regular crew. He hired extra guns. Garrett fired toward the eastern ridge, then ducked back down. They're trying to keep us pinned while others circle around. If they get behind us, they won't. Caleb's voice was hard. We've got the trenches, the barricades. We can hold them. They fought through the night, a desperate defense against attackers who stayed out of range, firing just often enough to keep the ranch hands pinned. Leanne loaded rifles, passed ammunition, and once, when a man was wounded in the shoulder, helped drag him to the house where they'd set up a makeshift infirmary. The wounded man was young, maybe 20, his face pale with shock and pain. Leanne pressed cloth to his shoulder, trying to slow the bleeding, while around them the battle continued. We can't hold forever, the young hand gasped. Too many of them. We don't have to hold forever, Leanne said, her voice steadier than she felt. Just until dawn. Dawn would bring witnesses. Dawn would make this a public battle that Pike couldn't hide or explain away. They just had to survive until sunrise. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Ammunition ran low. Men grew exhausted, their return fire sporadic and desperate. Leanne moved through the house and yard, bringing water, bandaging wounds, doing whatever she could to keep the defense functioning. Then just as the eastern sky began to lighten, she heard something that made her blood run cold. The sound of horses, many of them, approaching fast from the south. "Reinforcements!" someone shouted. "Pike's bringing more men!" Garrett swore viciously. "We can't hold against another wave. We've got to fall back to the house, make our stand there." But the horses didn't attack. Instead, they formed a line between the ranch and the ridge, and in the growing light, Leon saw something unexpected. Sheriff Hayes at the front, leading what looked like every able-bodied man from town who could ride and shoot. Hayes's voice carried across the valley, amplified by the still morning air. "Pike, this is Sheriff Hayes. Stand down immediately or face charges of attempted murder." The shooting stopped. In the sudden silence, Leon heard birds beginning to sing, oblivious to the violence that had shattered the night. Hayes rode closer to the ridge, his rifle across his saddle. "I've got 30 witnesses here who just saw your men attacking a lawful ranch. You've got one chance to surrender peacefully." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, figures began to appear on the ridge, hands raised. Pikes hired guns, recognizing that their cover was blown and their employer's protection worthless when faced with the law and 36 armed townsmen. But Pike himself was nowhere to be seen. Hayes and his men rounded up the attackers, disarming them and binding their hands. Leanne stood in the yard, her legs shaking with exhaustion and relief, watching justice happen in real time. It felt surreal, like something from a story rather than her actual life. Caleb appeared beside her, a bandage wrapped around his arm, but his smile intact. "We did it. We actually did it. Is it over?" "The shooting is." He looked toward the hills where the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. But Pike's still out there somewhere. Nathan arrived 2 hours later, riding hard with Marcus behind him. He took in the scene, the captured gunmen, the wounded hands being tended, the bullet-scarred buildings, and his expression went dark with fury. "When did it happen?" "Just after midnight," Garrett reported. "Sustained attack from multiple positions. We held them until Hayes showed up with half the town." Nathan turned to the sheriff, who was overseeing the prisoners. "How did you know to come?" Hayes's expression was grim. "Got a tip from someone in town who saw Pike's men gathering at sunset, more than could be explained by ranch work. Figured something was brewing, so I rounded up everyone I could trust and rode out." He paused. "Good thing, too. Another hour and you might not have held." "Where's Pike?" "Gone. Disappeared right before we arrived. But it doesn't matter. We've got his men, we've got witnesses, and we've got enough evidence to put him away for years." Hayes gestured to the captured gunmen. "They're already talking, trying to cut deals. Pike's operation is finished." Nathan's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "He'll run. Take his money and disappear somewhere the law can't reach." "Maybe. But he'll be running as a wanted man and his reputation's destroyed. Every business deal, every contact, every bit of influence he built, it's all gone." Hayes met Nathan's eyes. "That's not a small thing on the frontier. A man without reputation is a man without power." It wasn't the justice of seeing Pike in chains, but it was justice nonetheless. The kind that worked slowly but permanently, destroying what mattered most to men like Pike: their standing, their credibility, their ability to operate with impunity. The townsmen who'd come with Hayes helped with cleanup and repairs, working alongside the ranch hands in a show of solidarity Leon hadn't expected. Men who'd dismissed her in the store now worked to rebuild what Pike had tried to destroy. Women from town arrived later with food and medical supplies, turning the ranch into something like a community gathering rather than a battlefield. By noon, the wounded were stable, the prisoners were loaded into wagons for transport to jail, and the immediate crisis was over. Hayes prepared to leave, tipping his hat to Nathan. "You've got a standing invitation to press charges in town whenever you're ready. The prosecutor's already building a case." "I'll be there." Nathan shook the sheriff's hand. "And thank you for coming when it mattered." Hayes nodded, then looked at Leon. "Mrs. Chen, you started quite a chain of events when you walked into Miller's store with those saddles." "I just wanted to survive." "Sometimes survival is the most revolutionary act there is." Hayes swung into his saddle. "Take care of each other out here." They watched him ride away with the prisoners and townsmen, a long line of horses kicking up dust against the afternoon sun. When they were gone, the ranch fell into an exhausted quiet. Leon stood in the yard, looking at the buildings she'd helped defend, the land she'd helped hold. Her hands were blistered and dirty, her dress torn and stained with smoke and blood that wasn't hers. She felt hollowed out, like something essential had been burned away in the night's violence. Nathan appeared beside her, his presence solid and grounding. "You should rest." "So should you." "I will. After I check the stock, make sure nothing else is damaged." He paused. "Leanne, what you did last night, helping with the wounded, keeping everyone supplied, that mattered. You could have hidden, and no one would have blamed you, but you stood with us." "Where else would I be?" The question seemed to surprise him. Then he smiled, tired but genuine. "Nowhere else. You're home." The word settled into Leon's chest like a seed in fertile soil. Home. Not borrowed, not temporary, just home. Over the following days, the ranch slowly recovered its rhythm. The burned sections were cleared, preparations began for rebuilding. The wounded healed, telling and retelling the story of the night they'd held off Pike's hired guns until help arrived. Leanne returned to her work, fixing what was broken and building what was needed, her hands finding comfort in familiar patterns. A week after the attack, word came from town. Pike had been spotted 200 miles north, trying to sell off assets before fleeing to Canada. A warrant had been issued for his arrest on charges of attempted murder, arson, theft, and conspiracy. His properties were being seized to pay damages. His name was ruined across 3 territories. He'd lost everything. Not to violence, but to the same legal system he'd tried to manipulate. Nathan read the news aloud in the main house. The ranch hands gathered to hear. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Garrett raised his coffee cup. "To justice, slow as winter, but just as certain." The others raised their cups in agreement. Leanne joined them, feeling a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. She'd spent so long braced for the next attack that peace felt disorienting, like stepping onto solid ground after months on a rocking boat. That evening, she walked out to the ridge where the final battle had been fought. The earth still showed scars, bullet casings glinting in the grass, scorched patches where muzzle flash had ignited dry brush. But the valley beyond was beautiful in the fading light, gold and purple and endless. She heard footsteps behind her. Nathan climbed the ridge to stand beside her, his gaze following hers across the landscape. "Thinking about leaving?" he asked quietly. "No." "Thinking about staying?" Leanne glanced at him. "If that's still an option." "It was never not an option. You earned your place here, Leanne, multiple times over." Nathan's expression grew thoughtful. "But I want you to stay because you want to, not because you don't have anywhere else to go." Leanne thought about the question beneath his words, the choice he was offering her. She could leave, could take her skills and her hard-won confidence to any town, any ranch, any place that needed someone who knew how to build and fix and endure. The frontier was full of opportunities for someone with her abilities, but opportunities weren't the same as belonging. "I want to stay," she said firmly. "This ranch, these people, they became mine somewhere between the first wagon I fixed and the last bullet that flew over my head. I'm not leaving what's mine." Nathan's smile was slow and warm, reaching his eyes in a way she'd rarely seen. "Good, because the ranch is better with you in it." They stood in comfortable silence as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire. Below them, the ranch settled in for the night, lamps being lit in windows, horses being fed, men finishing the day's work and gathering for supper. It looked like home. It felt like home. And for the first time since her husband died, Leanne let herself believe that home was something she could have again. The weeks that followed brought a new kind of normal. Pike's trial proceeded in absentia, his crimes documented and prosecuted while he remained a fugitive somewhere beyond the reach of local law. His former employees testified, exchanging reduced sentences for cooperation. The truth of his methods spread through the valley like wildfire, and other ranchers who'd suffered similar pressure came forward with their own stories. Pike's empire, built on intimidation and exploitation, collapsed like a house with rotten foundations. For the ranch, life moved forward. The western barn was rebuilt, stronger than before, with stone foundation posts that wouldn't burn. Leanne designed a better layout for the tack room, and the men built it to her specifications without question. When a buyer came looking for custom saddles, Nathan sent them to Leanne, and she began taking commissions, her work earning reputation across the territory. The saddles she'd first tried to sell to Miller, the ones that had started everything, Nathan hung on the wall of the main house. Not for sale, not for use, just as a reminder of where they'd started and how far they'd come. One evening in late autumn, with the first cold winds blowing down from the mountains, Nathan found Leon in the barn. She was working on a saddle for a rancher in Cheyenne, her hands moving with practiced confidence. "Got a minute?" he asked. Leanne set down her tools. "Always." Nathan pulled up a crate and sat down, his expression serious but not troubled. "I've been thinking about the ranch, about its future." "Worried?" "No, planning." He leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. This place nearly broke under Pike's pressure. It survived because good people stood together, but it was close. Too close. "I don't want to run it that way anymore, barely holding on, vulnerable to the next threat." "What do you want instead?" "Partnership. Not just hired hands working for wages, but people with stake in what we're building." He met her eyes. "I'm offering you a share of the ranch, Leon, full partnership. Equal say in decisions, equal share of profits, your name on the deed alongside mine." Leon's breath caught. "Nathan, I don't have money to buy in." "I'm not asking for money. I'm offering recognition for what you've already contributed. You helped save this place. You've built and fixed and fought for it. That's worth more than gold." His voice was steady, certain. "And I trust you to help me make it something that lasts." The offer was staggering. Partnership meant security, stability, a future that wasn't dependent on anyone else's goodwill. It meant truly belonging, not as an employee or a guest, but as an owner of something worth protecting. "Why?" Leon asked quietly. "Why me?" Nathan smiled. "Because when everyone told you to give up, you kept building. When Pike offered you easy money, you chose hard principles. When bullets flew, you stood and fought." He paused. "Because you're the kind of partner I want beside me when the next crisis comes. And on the frontier, there's always a next crisis." Leon looked around the barn, at the tools she'd organized, the equipment she'd repaired, the space that had become hers through daily work and small victories. She thought about the men who'd accepted her, the community that had defended her, the life she'd built from nothing but skill and stubborn refusal to break. "Yes," she said, "I accept." Nathan's smile widened. "Good. We'll make it official in town tomorrow. But tonight, let's just celebrate that we're still here and still standing." They walked back to the house together as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Inside, the ranch hands had gathered for supper, their voices filling the room with laughter and rough camaraderie. Caleb was telling some elaborate story, gesturing wildly while Marcus rolled his eyes and Garrett pretended not to be amused. When Nathan and Leanne entered, Caleb paused mid-sentence. "Well, did you ask her?" Nathan nodded. "I did." "And?" Caleb's grin was expectant. "I said yes," Leanne answered. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Someone produced a bottle of whiskey that had been hidden for special occasions. Glasses were poured and raised, toasts offered to partnership and survival, and the stubborn refusal to let bastards win. Leanne stood among them, a glass in her hand, and felt something she'd thought lost forever, joy. Not the desperate, fragile kind that came from brief respite, but the deep, solid kind that came from knowing you were exactly where you were supposed to be. Later, after the celebration had wound down and the men had drifted off to the bunkhouse, Leanne stood on the porch alone. The valley spread before her in silver moonlight, vast and wild and beautiful. Somewhere out there, Pike was running, his power gone, his reputation destroyed. Somewhere out there, other people were fighting their own battles against men who thought money and cruelty could conquer anything. But here, on this ranch, in this moment, the good had won. Not through violence, though violence had come. Not through wealth, though poverty had threatened. Through standing together. Through refusing to break. Through the simple, revolutionary act of insisting that people mattered more than profit and principles mattered more than expediency. Nathan appeared beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one, and they stood in comfortable silence, watching the night. "What are you thinking?" he asked eventually. "That I walked into Miller's store thinking I was selling saddles to survive another week, and somehow I ended up here. Regret it?" "Not for a second." Leanne took a sip of coffee, letting its warmth spread through her. "I was so afraid back then. Afraid of being seen, being judged, being found wanting. I made myself small because I thought small was safe. And now? Now I know small isn't safe. It's just slow dying. She looked at him. Thank you for seeing past the fear, for paying fair price when no one else would, for giving me a chance to be more than a desperate widow. Nathan was quiet for a moment. You were always more than that. I just recognized it sooner than most. He set down his cup. The work you did is doing. It matters, Leon. Not just to this ranch, but as proof that the frontier doesn't have to be a place where only the ruthless survive, that we can build something better. Can we? Really? We already did. Nathan gestured toward the rebuilt barn, the fortified buildings, the land they'd defended and held. It's not perfect. It's not easy. But it's ours, built by our hands and our choices. That's better than anything Pike could have taken. Leon thought about the two saddles hanging on the wall inside, symbols of where she'd started. Thought about the partnership deed they'd sign tomorrow, symbol of where she'd arrived. The distance between those 2 points had been measured not in miles, but in courage, in choosing to stand when running was easier, in trusting that worth could be earned and recognized, even in a place that seemed designed to crush the vulnerable. What happens now? She asked. After everything with Pike, after all the fighting, what do we build? Nathan considered the question, his gaze on the dark valley. We build what we defended, a ranch that's fair and sustainable, a place where good work gets recognized and people aren't disposable, a partnership that proves two people together are stronger than one person alone. He looked at her. We build the kind of place we'd want to defend again, if it came to that. And if Pike comes back, he won't. Men like Pike need power and reputation to operate. We took both. Even if he returns, he's just another bitter man with grievances. Not a threat. Not anymore. Nathan's voice was certain. We won, Leon. Completely. Now we get to figure out what winning actually means. The question settled between them, full of possibility. Leon had spent so long focused on survival that she'd almost forgotten what it meant to think beyond the next threat, the next crisis, the next narrow escape. Now she had space to imagine a future that stretched beyond mere endurance into something like thriving. I think winning means waking up without fear, she said slowly. Doing work that matters. Being part of something bigger than yourself. She smiled. And maybe teaching some other desperate widow that her work is worth fair price. Nathan laughed, the sound warm and genuine. That sounds like a good start. They finished their coffee as the night deepened, two partners looking toward a future they'd fought to reach. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Ranches always did. Weather and markets and all the small disasters that made frontier life difficult. But they'd face those challenges together, with resources and reputation and the knowledge that they'd survived worse. Eventually, Nathan headed inside to sleep. Leon stayed a moment longer, breathing in the cold night air, committing this feeling to memory. Peace, security, belonging. The things she'd stopped believing she could have. She walked to the barn one last time, running her hand along the wood she'd helped cut and shape, the building she'd helped defend. Then she went to her room, not a borrowed space anymore, but hers by right and choice, and lay down on the cot that would soon be replaced with a real bed in a real house on land she co-owned. Sleep came easy for the first time in years. The next morning, Leon woke to sunlight and the sound of men already at work. She dressed carefully in her better dress, the one she'd worn to face Pike in town. Today deserved the same respect. She was signing papers that would change her life permanently. Nathan was waiting with the wagon, and they rode to town together. The autumn air was crisp and clean, the sky achingly blue. The valley had never looked more beautiful. In town, they went straight to the land office where a clerk had prepared the partnership deed. Leon read it carefully, making sure she understood every clause and commitment. Then she signed her name in careful script, watching as Nathan added his beside it. The clerk stamped the document official. Congratulations, Mrs. Chen. You're now a legal co-owner of the Cole Ranch. The words should have felt surreal. Instead, they felt right, like something clicking into place that had been loose for too long. They celebrated with lunch at the town restaurant, a small extravagance that felt earned. Other diners glanced their way, some with curiosity, others with respect. The widow who'd been dismissed and pitied was now a property owner and businesswoman. The transformation was visible in how people held themselves around her. Miller appeared as they were leaving, his expression complicated. Mrs. Chen, Cole, heard about the partnership. That's good news. Thank you, Leon said neutrally. Miller shifted uncomfortably. About before. When you came in with those saddles, I should have... He stopped, struggling with words. I should have treated you fairer. Should have seen the quality instead of just seeing a desperate woman. It was as close to an apology as men like Miller got. Leon could have thrown it back in his face, reminded him of every dismissive word and insulting offer. But what would that prove? That she could hold grudges? She'd spent too much energy fighting to waste more on bitterness. The past is past, she said simply. What matters is what we build going forward. Miller nodded, relief evident in his face. If you ever need supplies for that leather work, I'll make sure you get fair pricing, best I can offer. I appreciate that. They left him standing there, probably still wrestling with the cognitive dissonance of treating a woman as an equal business partner. But that was his problem now, not hers. The ride back to the ranch was peaceful. Nathan talked about plans for the coming year, expanding the herd, improving the irrigation system, maybe hiring another hand or two. Leanne listened and contributed ideas, getting used to the feeling of having a voice that mattered in decisions. They crested the ridge overlooking the ranch just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western hills. The valley spread before them in golden light, the buildings casting long shadows, smoke rising from the chimney in a steady stream. Leanne pulled the wagon to a stop, wanting to hold this moment. From here, she could see the entire arc of her journey, from the desperate widow carrying saddles into a hostile town, to the woman who'd stood against fire and bullets, to the partner who'd signed her name beside Nathan's on a legal deed. You all right? Nathan asked. More than all right. Leanne clicked the reins, starting the wagon moving again. I'm home. They descended into the valley as evening approached, returning to the ranch that was now legally, officially, permanently hers. The hands greeted them with grins and congratulations, already knowing how the day had gone. News traveled fast in close quarters. That night they gathered for supper in the main house, and Caleb proposed another toast. To Leon Chen, who walked in here with nothing but skill and stubbornness, and ended up owning half of everything. Proof that the frontier rewards those too stubborn to quit. Hear, hear, the men chorused, raising their glasses. Leon raised hers as well, looking around at faces that had become familiar, people who'd become something like family. Not the family she'd been born into or married into, but the family she'd chosen and earned through shared hardship and mutual respect. Thank you, she said quietly. All of you. For standing with me when standing was dangerous, for seeing past what I was to what I could become, for teaching me that home isn't something you're born into. It's something you build, one choice at a time. The room fell quiet, the kind of silence that held weight and meaning. Then Garrett, gruff and practical as ever, cleared his throat. Well, enough sentiment. Someone's got to cook breakfast tomorrow, and it's not going to be me. The tension broke into laughter, and conversation resumed. Leon sat back, letting the warmth of the moment wash over her. Outside, the frontier was still the frontier, harsh and unforgiving, full of challenges that would test them again and again. But inside this room, in this moment, they had everything that mattered. The weeks turned into months. Winter came, blanketing the valley in snow that turned everything quiet and white. Leon worked through the cold, building furniture for the house, crafting saddles in the barn while wind howled outside. She and Nathan planned the spring planting, argued about whether to expand the cattle operation or focus on horses, made decisions together like the partners they'd become. Word of Pike's final fate reached them in February. He'd been caught trying to cross into Canada and brought back to stand trial. The prosecution, armed with testimony from dozens of victims and former employees, had built an overwhelming case. Pike was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison, his assets seized and distributed to those he'd wronged. The ranch received compensation for the burned barn and stolen cattle. It wasn't everything they'd lost, but it was enough to fund the improvements they'd planned. Justice, slow and imperfect, but real, nonetheless. Spring arrived with a rush of green and life. Leon stood in the rebuilt barn, now twice as large as the original, and felt something like contentment, The two saddles that had started everything still hung on the wall of the main house, but she'd made dozens more since then, each one carrying her mark, her skill, her story. Nathan found her there one afternoon, watching new calves test their legs in the pasture. Thinking about anything in particular? Just noticing how much has changed, how much I've changed. Leon glanced at him. A year ago, I was terrified of being noticed. Now, I'm advertising custom leather work across 3 territories. It's strange how fast life can turn. Not strange, just what happens when you stop hiding and start building. Nathan leaned on the fence beside her. You know what the hands say about you? I'm almost afraid to ask. They say you're the toughest person on the ranch. Tougher than Garrett, tougher than me. Because you came here with nothing and built everything anyway. Leon felt her throat tighten. I'm not tough. I'm just too stubborn to quit. On the frontier, that's the same thing, Nathan smiled. And for what it's worth, I agree with them. You're the strongest person I know. The words settled into Leanne like sunlight into earth, warming something deep inside that had been cold for too long. She'd spent so much time thinking of herself as weak, as damaged, as someone who'd survived only through luck and other people's charity. But maybe that had never been true. Maybe she'd always been stronger than she knew, and it had just taken the right circumstances to prove it. Thank you, she said, for seeing that when I couldn't. That's what partners do. Nathan pushed off the fence. Come on, we've got work to do. They walked back to the ranch together, 2 people who'd found each other in the midst of crisis and built something that outlasted the danger. The valley stretched around them, vast and beautiful in theirs, earned through sweat and courage and the stubborn refusal to let injustice win. Leanne looked up at the sky, at clouds moving in patterns older than memory, and felt something she'd thought lost forever. Not just survival, not even just happiness, but purpose. The deep, unshakable knowledge that her life mattered, that her work had meaning, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She'd come to the frontier as a widow, with nothing but desperate hope and 2 handmade saddles. She'd faced down a man who thought money made him untouchable, stood against fire and bullets and the crushing weight of a system designed to favor the powerful. And she'd won. Not alone, but that was the point. On the frontier, no one survived alone. You survived by building community, by standing together, by refusing to let fear or cruelty or overwhelming odds break your spirit. The frightened woman who'd walked into Miller's store was gone, transformed into someone stronger, braver, more certain of her own worth. And the life she'd built, the partnership, the work, the belonging, that was hers now. Earned, defended, permanent. As she stepped into the barn to begin the afternoon's work, Leon Chen smiled. The frontier had tried to break her. Instead, it had forged her into something unbreakable. And tomorrow, and every day after, she would wake up on land she owned, surrounded by people she trusted, doing work that mattered. That was worth more than any price Pike could have offered. That was worth everything.